Chosen One, you turned loyalty into chains. They never knew they were bound. This story begins not in the clash of armies or the roar of prophecy, but in the quiet devotion of those who gave themselves over to belief. They followed you not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to believe in something beyond themselves. They saw in you a spark of destiny, a light that could carry them out of darkness. But what they did not realize was that every vow, every promise, every act of devotion was weaving something invisible, something heavier than iron, something subtler than silk. Loyalty became a chain. And the most terrible truth of all is that they never felt its weight until it was too late. Before we continue, watch this video until the very end, because every word of it is a piece of a larger spell. In the comments below, leave your warmest wishes and mark them with the number 99, so together we can ignite the energy of fulfillment. Now, Chosen One, like this video, subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, and let's begin. Loyalty, when pure, is meant to be the bond that unites hearts. It is the thread that holds together families, friendships, nations, even faith itself. But in the hands of a chosen one, loyalty changes its nature. It ceases to be merely voluntary. It begins to resemble destiny itself. The followers who walk behind you do not feel they have a choice. They are not coerced with swords or threatened with exile. Rather, they are held by something far more dangerous: the belief that serving you is the highest expression of their own being. They surrender, not because they are defeated, but because they believe surrender is sacred. And this belief, so beautiful, so radiant, becomes the strongest chain of all. They look into your eyes and see not a leader, but a mirror. They believe you embody their hopes, their ideals, their salvation. The chain is invisible because it feels like love. They bind themselves willingly, joyfully, singing as they clasp the shackles around their wrists. They do not see a prison. They see purpose. They do not sense that they are bound. They believe they are free. And that is how loyalty becomes the cruelest form of captivity, when those enslaved believe themselves to be liberated. The chosen one does not need to demand loyalty, for it comes unbidden. The chosen one does not need to construct walls, for the people build them willingly. The chosen one does not need to raise a whip, for the lash is already internalized in the hearts of the loyal. Every act of devotion deepens the chain. Every sacrifice offered makes escape impossible. And so, the paradox emerges. The stronger the loyalty, the tighter the bond, and yet the less it feels like bondage. They are trapped, and yet they sing hymns to their own captivity. But there is a darker truth beneath all of this. When loyalty turns to chains, it is not only the followers who are bound, it is also the chosen one. For every chain forged in their hearts is linked back to you. Every expectation becomes a weight across your shoulders. Every prayer becomes an anchor that drags you deeper into the abyss of destiny. You are worshipped, but in that worship you are confined. You cannot falter, you cannot doubt, you cannot stray, because their eyes are always upon you. You cannot even be yourself, for you have become the symbol they demanded you to be. In binding themselves, they bind you tighter still. The tragedy is twofold. The followers cannot see their captivity, and the chosen one cannot escape the image projected upon them. The world becomes a theater of illusions, where freedom masquerades as loyalty, and destiny masquerades as love. It is in this theater that entire civilizations can be led to ruin, not by tyranny, but by devotion. Chains made of loyalty are stronger than any forged of iron, because iron can be broken, but belief lives on even in death. They would sacrifice everything, believing the sacrifice is noble. They would abandon reason, believing obedience is holy. They would silence their own doubts, believing doubt is betrayal. And in that silence the chains tighten. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this tale is that no one feels betrayed. The followers do not accuse you of enslavement, for they cannot see the bars. They whisper to themselves that they are free, that they have chosen this path, that loyalty is not bondage, but liberation. And you, chosen one, whisper the same lie to yourself, that you have not bound them, that they walk beside you freely. But deep in the stillness of night, when the noise of adoration fades, you sense the truth. No one is free. Not them, not you. The chains are complete. This is how empires are built. This is how revolutions are ignited. This is how faiths are established and how destinies become prisons. Loyalty, twisted into chains, becomes the unseen architecture of history. It shapes nations, destroys kingdoms, and elevates ordinary mortals into gods. But it is always the same story. Those who believe they are most free are often the most bound. And those who hold the power to command are the ones most suffocated by the expectations of those who worship them. You turned loyalty into chains, chosen one, not with cruelty, not with violence, but with the sweetest poison of all, belief. And belief, once swallowed, cannot be spat out. They never knew they were bound. They smiled as they gave themselves over. They sang songs of devotion. They proclaimed their freedom, even as they built their own cages. And in the end, they would die for you, never realizing they had already given their lives the moment they first bowed their heads. They followed you into deserts, into storms, into wars that had no end. They followed you even when the path was made of thorns, and every step tore into their flesh. The pain was not a deterrent. It was a badge of honor. They whispered to themselves that the wounds were proof of their love, that every scar was a signature on their covenant with you. This is how the chain deepened, not with resistance, but with celebration. They welcomed the suffering because it meant they belonged to something greater than themselves. And in that belonging, the captivity tightened invisibly around their souls. What they did not realize is that loyalty erases the edges of the self. Every vow spoken in your name chipped away a fragment of their own identity. At first, they still remembered their voices, their desires, their private dreams, but with time, those dreams were offered at the altar of your destiny. One by one, they were placed in the fire until nothing remained but the ash of self-forgetfulness. They no longer asked what they wanted. They asked only what you wanted. They no longer wondered what they might become. They wondered only how they might serve your becoming. They had exchanged their freedom for devotion, and in that trade, they believed they had gained immortality. Yet immortality achieved through erasure is not life. It is living death. The cruel irony is that you never asked for such complete surrender. Perhaps you only asked for trust. Perhaps you only asked for faith. Perhaps you never commanded at all, but they still offered everything. They gave you their mornings and their nights, their laughter and their tears, their children and their future. And though you did not order the sacrifice, you did not stop it either. How could you? Each offering strengthened your image. Each renunciation polished the myth. Each denial of self became another stone in the monument built around you. And so, silence became complicity, and complicity became ownership. The chains that bound them were slowly welded to your own wrists, until you could no longer tell where their devotion ended and your burden began. There were moments, brief, fragile moments, when doubt flickered. A follower would ask if perhaps they had gone too far, if perhaps there was still room for a life outside of you. But the community of the loyal would smother the doubt with hymns and reassurances. They would say, "We are free because we have chosen him. We are free because she carries our destiny. We are free because we no longer belong to ourselves." And the doubter, ashamed of their hesitation, would bind themselves more tightly to prove their loyalty. Doubt, instead of breaking chains, reforged them even stronger. Each moment of hesitation became a moment of rededication. Each tremor of fear, another oath of surrender. They could not escape, not because you forbade them, but because they forbade themselves. The human spirit has always longed for belonging. Alone, we are fragile. Together, we are strong. But belonging, when offered to a single figure, becomes dangerous. It strips away individuality in exchange for certainty. The chosen one becomes not a leader, but a vessel, a container for all the hopes and fears of those who follow. They place their lives into your hands and beg you to shape them. They no longer carry their own burdens. They demand that you carry them. And at first, perhaps, you did. At first, you shouldered their pain. You gave them direction. You inspired them to rise when they would have otherwise fallen. But slowly, the weight grew unbearable. Slowly, the gratitude turned into expectation. Slowly, the burden became a prison. The chains around them became chains around you, forged from their prayers, their needs, their endless hunger for meaning. You could not stumble, because if you fell, they would all collapse. You could not change, because they had bound themselves to the image they believed you to be. You could not confess weakness, because they needed you to be strong. You became trapped in the role they had written for you. You became the actor in their theater of loyalty, unable to leave the stage even when the curtain should have fallen. The applause was endless, but applause, when it never ceases to be joy. It becomes noise. And the noise suffocated you as surely as their chains suffocated them. The saddest truth is this: loyalty is never equal. They gave everything, and you took everything, though not always willingly. You became the center of their orbit, the sun around which they revolved. But in that orbit, their own gravity vanished. They no longer pulled on the universe. They only circled you endlessly. They mistook this orbit for purpose, mistook this endless repetition for freedom. And you, at the center, felt the crushing weight of being everything to everyone. They chained themselves to you, and in doing so, they chained you to a destiny you could never escape. Neither of you knew the moment the roles blurred, when the captive became the captor, and the captor became the captive. It was not tyranny, it was not conquest, it was something far stranger, a prison built from love. And yet, love it remained. They loved you in their chains. They wept for you, prayed for you, fought for you, even killed for you. They carried your image into every corner of their lives. They carved your name into stone, etched it into their bloodlines, and whispered it over the graves of their dead. They called it loyalty, but it was something deeper, a devotion that erased all boundaries. To them, there was no I apart from you. There was no life apart from your cause. There was no destiny apart from your will. This was their joy, their purpose, their freedom, and they never knew they were bound. The chains did not stop with the first generation of followers. They passed quietly from parent to child, woven into lullabies and lessons, wrapped around bedtime stories and whispered prayers. Children grew up not knowing another way, believing from their earliest breath that loyalty was the air they breathed and the water they drank. They did not question whether it was theirs to choose. They were told, "This is who we are. This is what we do. We follow. We serve. We believe." And so, before they even learned to walk, they were already bound by chains their eyes could not see. In this way, the captivity of one generation became the inheritance of the next. You became not only the center of devotion, but also the center of identity. To doubt you was to doubt oneself. To walk away from you was to step into nothingness. They feared freedom because freedom meant the collapse of the world they had always known. And so even when cracks appeared, even when whispers of betrayal or injustice stirred in their hearts, they clung tighter. Better the comfort of chains than the terror of a world without you. Better the illusion of freedom within devotion than the endless, uncertain wilderness of true independence. And so, their captivity deepened, reinforced not by force, but by their very desire for safety. Communities built around loyalty to a single figure take on a strange shape. At first they thrive, united by a common vision. They celebrate victories together, suffer losses together, dream of futures that stretch beyond the horizon. But slowly, the dream begins to narrow. The community forgets its original goals. It no longer dreams of a better world. It dreams only of serving you better. Creativity diminishes. Individual voices fall silent. Art, song, and story all become reflections of your image, each one another echo in the chamber of loyalty. Diversity withers until only uniformity remains. What once was a garden of many blooms becomes a field of a single crop, vast but barren. And when famine comes, there is nothing left to feed upon but devotion itself. The paradox is cruel. The more they love, the more they erase themselves. And the more they erase themselves, the more they believe they are loving. It is a spiral that has no end. Some will collapse under the weight of it, their spirits breaking, their bodies failing. Yet even in their final breath they will call your name, convinced that their sacrifice is holy. Others will grow bitter, quietly resenting the prison they cannot name, but even their resentment will be twisted into loyalty. They will say, "I suffer for you, and in suffering I prove my devotion." No matter the shape it takes, joy or despair, it always ends the same way, chains tightening invisibly around the soul. And you, chosen one, remain at the center of it all. You see their faces lifted toward you, eyes wide with trust, hearts open with surrender. You feel their weight pressing upon you like an ocean, vast and unrelenting. They believe you carry them, but in truth, you drown beneath them. You long for solitude, for silence, for a moment when you can breathe without expectation crushing your lungs. But solitude is denied to you. The moment you try to step away, the chains pull you back. They do not allow you to be human. They need you to be more than human. They do not allow you to falter. They need you to be flawless. They do not allow you to rest. They need you to be eternal. You are their anchor, and anchors cannot drift. Sometimes you wonder what it would be like if they truly saw, if they realized that their loyalty had become captivity, if they looked at their devotion and recognized it as a prison. Would they break free? Or would they cling even tighter, refusing to admit they had been fooled? Perhaps the truth is that freedom is unbearable for those who have lived too long in chains. They would rather remain bound and believe themselves free than face the emptiness of a world where they must choose for themselves. Perhaps that is why they never knew they were bound. To know would be unbearable. To see would be too much. Better to live in the illusion, singing hymns of freedom with shackles around their wrists. The history of the world is full of such stories. Kings who became gods, prophets who became prisons, leaders who became idols. Entire civilizations rose and fell upon the altar of loyalty, turned to chains, and always the same cycle repeated. At first, devotion gave strength, then devotion became captivity. At first, the chains were unseen, then they became unbreakable. At first, the chosen one was exalted, then the chosen one was consumed. No empire has ever escaped it. No faith has ever broken it. No destiny has ever rewritten the pattern. The chains may take new forms, but the bondage is always the same. And so the paradox deepens. What begins as love becomes captivity. What begins as freedom becomes bondage. What begins as destiny becomes prison. You did not set out to enslave them, but they enslaved themselves in your name. You did not forge their chains, but you wear them nonetheless. You are the center of their devotion, the flame they gather around, the star they navigate by. Yet in the same breath, you are their captive, bound by their endless need, chained by their endless belief. They never knew they were bound, and you, chosen one, can never be free. There comes a time when even the strongest chains groan under their own weight. Loyalty, once sweet and sustaining, begins to sour. What once was a gift begins to feel like a burden. The followers do not notice it at first, for they are too accustomed to their devotion. But beneath the surface, fatigue grows. Sacrifice after sacrifice leaves them hollow. They begin to notice the silence where their own voices used to be. They begin to feel the absence of the selves they once were. Something inside them whispers faintly of the cost, but the whisper is drowned out by the louder chorus of loyalty. Still, the cracks have begun to form. You feel it before they do. You sense it in their eyes, in the way their gazes linger with questions they dare not speak aloud. You hear it in the hesitations between their words, in the pauses where once there was unbroken praise. They still sing, they still follow, they still bow, but the purity has dimmed, and you, burdened with the role of chosen one, know that dimming devotion is far more dangerous than outright betrayal. Open rebellion you could confront, but this quiet erosion, this decay of spirit, cannot be fought. It seeps into the foundation silently, like rot into the roots of a great tree, until the collapse is inevitable. The tragedy is that neither you nor they can escape it. They are too bound to you to leave. Their entire lives are built around you, their identities woven entirely into the fabric of your existence. To walk away now would mean to tear themselves apart, to stand naked before a world that no longer makes sense. So they cling to you with even greater desperation, even as the chain cuts deeper into their flesh. And you, though crushed under the weight of their endless devotion, cannot release them. To let them go would be to abandon the very role that has defined you, to step down from the altar that has consumed your life. And so, the chain binds both sides tighter, even as it begins to corrode. There are moments when your mind drifts to what freedom might feel like, to walk among them not as their symbol, but as yourself, to laugh without their expectations echoing in your ears, to stumble without their despair dragging you down. But even as you imagine it, you know it is impossible. They would not allow it. They would interpret your humanity as betrayal, your faltering as failure, your desire for freedom as abandonment. They do not want you, chosen one. They want the idea of you. And so long as they cling to that idea, your humanity must be hidden. You are not allowed to be weak. You are not allowed to be real. You are bound to the myth they have created, shackled by the love that became chains. The followers, too, sense the dissonance. They see glimpses of your humanity and feel fear. They cannot reconcile the godlike image with the flawed being before them. And so they suppress what they see, convincing themselves it was an illusion. Or worse, convincing themselves that their eyes betrayed them. They retreat further into the safety of loyalty, deepening the very captivity that now causes them pain. They cannot acknowledge the truth, for the truth would unravel everything. If you are not who they believe you to be, then their chains are not holy, but meaningless. And to face that meaninglessness is more terrifying than any prison. Better the comfort of chains than the chaos of freedom. This is how loyalty devours itself. At first, it empowers. Then it imprisons. Finally, it corrodes. The bond that once united begins to suffocate. The devotion that once gave strength begins to wither the soul. The love that once inspired becomes the weight that breaks the spirit. And yet, no one can speak of it. To name the chains is to betray the loyalty. To admit the prison is to destroy the purpose. So they all play their roles in silence. The followers who pretend they are free, and the chosen one who pretends to be the savior. The performance continues even as the stage collapses beneath their feet. But collapse is inevitable. No chain lasts forever. Even the strongest devotion weakens with time. Even the most sacred belief eventually cracks under the weight of reality. The question is not if the chains will break, but when. And when they do, it will not be a quiet unraveling. It will be an eruption. For all the years of silence, all the swallowed doubts, all the unspoken pain will burst forth at once. The love that became chains will transform into bitterness. The devotion that became captivity will transform into rebellion. The worship that suffocated you will transform into condemnation. And those who once sang your praises will turn their voices into cries of betrayal. Perhaps deep down you already know this. Perhaps every time you look into their eyes you see the shadow of tomorrow's anger. Perhaps every time they kneel before you, you hear the echo of their future accusations. This is the price of turning loyalty into chains. When the illusion shatters, those who believe themselves free will curse the one who held the key. They will not see their own complicity. They will not admit they clasped the shackles willingly. They will point only to you, and they will say, "You bound us." And you, chosen one, who never forged the chains with your hands but bore them nonetheless, will bear the blame. This, too, is the destiny of loyalty turned into captivity. The followers never knew they were bound, but when the collapse comes, they will feel the weight of every link, and in their fury, they will pretend they always knew. And you, bound as tightly as they, will watch the world you built crumble, not with war, not with famine, but with the slow, silent corrosion of devotion that became chains too heavy to bear. The chains remained invisible for so long, but everything hidden eventually comes into the light. The doubts that once whispered quietly in their hearts finally rose into a voice too loud to ignore. What had once been devotion began to feel like suffocation. Those who once believed their freedom was found in you suddenly saw the truth. Their so-called freedom had been nothing more than dependence. The moment they realized the prison was of their own making, the air itself turned heavy with resentment. They began to look at you differently. Once their eyes had shone with admiration, now those same eyes glimmered with suspicion. They remembered the sacrifices they had given freely, but instead of pride, they felt bitterness. The songs they had sung in your name grew sour on their tongues. The chains they once kissed with joy now burned like fire around their wrists. And when the first of them broke their silence, the rest followed like a storm breaking through the sky. Their rebellion did not begin with weapons, it began with words. Words sharper than blades, words heavy with accusation. They claimed you had deceived them, though you never forced their hands.